So if you're a business and you're using social media to sell your offer or your service or your product or whatever that is, I want to talk to you today about social funnels and specifically how buyers, how leads, how your audience is essentially going from finding your account to being curious about what it is that you have to offer to actually buying. I think before, what we used to think is everything that I produce on social media has to ultimately convert directly into my offer, which makes sense. This is why CTAs used to focus a lot on click the link in my bio to join, apply now, things like that. However, with the evolution of how social media is performing, what's been working with the algorithms, what people are actually engaging in, if you are someone that has been making hyper specific content focused on direct selling, you might be seeing that those types of posts don't necessarily pick up. And I know that metrics and numbers don't necessarily translate to money in the account. I know followers don't necessarily translate into money in the account. I want to share with you how people go through your marketing funnel that end up converting at the end. And I want to start by saying something controversial, which is not every piece of content is meant to convert. Hear me out. What I mean by this is not every piece of content is supposed to drive towards a sale immediately. On any platform that you're working with, each piece of content has a specific goal in your marketing funnel, but not all of them focus on the specifics of conversion. For example, if someone finds your account today, they're probably not going to immediately be ready to buy unless they were specifically looking for the solution you had to offer. They have the problem that you're speaking to, and your content is highly optimized. Most of the time, your content is going to attract them. Then they're going to feel curious enough, and you can build on that connection and so on, and then they'll end up converting. Now, how fast or how slow someone goes through this process obviously depends on how good your content is, how optimized your funnel is, your marketing channels, your brand, so many different components, but ultimately that is the funnel. And I want you to go ahead and look at the last few pieces of content that you put out and really look into how many pieces of content actually work through each part of the funnel that I'm going to be talking about. And the reason I'm getting specific about this today is because I'm seeing way too many people focus on the very bottom part of the funnel, but not enough on the top or the middle piece of the funnel components. And that is why they're realizing that their content isn't necessarily performing, even though they're selling like they used to, they're following the same strategies like they used to. And even if you are someone who's selling and promoting your offer and you're wondering why people aren't necessarily booking a sales call or buying or joining your program or service. Okay, so this framework for social funnels is very, very simple. It's the acronym ABC. So starting off with A, we want to really focus on attraction. Your goal with attraction style content is really focused on getting new leads, getting new eyeballs, even if that means re-engaging the people in your audience, which happens when enough people see your piece of content. So right now you might have 1,000 followers, right? But only 100 of those followers are seeing your content because it's not getting pushed out to your audience. Right now, with the way the algorithm works, is your content gets pushed out to a certain number of people. Depending on how those people engage with that piece of content, then it gets pushed out to more and more and more, starting with your followers, starting with your warmer audiences. And so you have to think about, okay, if I'm working on attraction pieces of content, I have to work on something that's going to really click with my biggest number one fans. Once enough people see that, then it's going to increase in terms of reach and then just increase over and over again. So attraction content doesn't necessarily have to mean going viral, getting millions of views. Sometimes it's just expanding beyond the kind of warmest people in your audience that you have. And sometimes it could also be reaching kind of colder leads and having that slow burn content, which you don't necessarily need to go viral to be achieving something like that. We've already been seeing platforms like Instagram doing this when they suggest posts based off of people you follow, other posts you've interacted with. And sometimes you see posts that, again, aren't necessarily viral, but the algorithm thinks that you'll like. The way to rank in posts like this is get enough of your audience engaging in things like this. The purpose of metrics and engagement, and when I talk about numbers in this specific scenario, I know that doesn't always necessarily translate to dollars, but it is important to note that that is a sign that people are interested in that specific piece of content or that topic or the way that you debriefed on this. Now, this is where your intention should be with attraction content to still make it relevant to your brand, to your offer, to your service, and not make it completely irrelevant. For example, if all the type of attraction content that I'm posting has to do with my lifestyle and going to the beach and going shopping, and it has nothing to do with my design business, ultimately people are going to engage in that, but they're never going to be curious enough to go down my funnel. So being very cautious in terms of attraction content and how it's used is important. So attraction-based content can look like something like following a trend, posting memes, posting something shareable, shareable and hopping on specific trends that fit your brand and things like that. But it could also look like creating topics that fall outside of the general cadence of what you like to post. Maybe you're a business that focuses a lot on education and value, and you post a personal thing every now and then. Maybe you post a different format or a different style. Maybe you're even experimenting with different hooks, whether they're, the first slide of a carousel, the first 2-3 seconds of a video, the first, line in a caption, right? All of those are attraction-based content. So with this, I really like to think about like snippets of information, point of view content, hot takes, controversial takes, things like that are all meant to focus on attention-based content. The goal here is to make it very easy to deliver and also shareable, viewable. Something else with this type of content is it should be just the right amount of general and specific enough to where even if someone doesn't understand your niche or your offer, they can still engage with this. They could still find it helpful. So instead of breaking down, for example, your exact framework and wondering why people aren't engaging with that, instead think about what is this framework actually solving for your ideal person? What is the result that someone can ultimately achieve with this framework? And instead you can change up the language or how that is delivered. So for example, if I'm turning this concept into a piece of content, I'm not going to talk about the ABCs of a social funnel, right? Instead, I'm going to talk about how to make sure every single piece of content performs. Or something better would be like, I've audited over 50 accounts and here's what I've noticed performs best when business owners do X in their content, and I would break down this framework. Notice how that is a little bit more generic. It's not as niche specific. It can bring a lot of people in, and that is the purpose. The next part of the framework, which is B, is building, right? Building connection, building curiosity, building trust. And ultimately, it's all about deepening their desire and interest and connection with you. So this is really where you're warming people up and getting people to know more about you and your brand. This is where people can move to the next stage fairly quickly or slowly, depending on where they're at in their buyer's journey, depending on how well your stuff is optimized when it comes to your personal brand, your brand design, your website, your pieces of content, the posts that you're putting out, how you're using your different marketing channels, how easy it is for people to understand what you're putting out and binge your content and move forward in the next stage. So again, this is a really good place for you to storytell, show off your thinking, and really build that credibility and resonance with your audience. And I think this is the part where people think that this is going to be their conversion content. So they'll go ahead and storytell, but then pitch something at the end. And I know people have different thoughts about what that looks like. Or they'll go ahead and show off their thinking. But again, with every post leading into a direct sell, you have to recognize that people at this stage are still trying to build that connection with you before they move on to the next phase of the funnel. So I want you to think about when you find somebody that you're probably a little bit curious in. Maybe you found them through that kind of attraction-based piece of content or something that they've put out there. And before you're even interested in working with them, you want to get to know more about them, their story, their background, their philosophy. I'm thinking about something that I recently invested in, and that was kind of the pipeline that I went through. I went through finding a piece of content, watching some of her content, and then ultimately listening to her podcast, downloading a freebie or a training that she had, learning more about her story, learning more about her philosophies and frameworks, looking at her website sales page quite a few times, and then ultimately going further and further deeper into that funnel. But it all started with her being able to build that trust, that connection, again, sharing her story, sharing her philosophies with me, for me to kind of check off one thing at a time of, okay, we align on this, we share the same values here, okay, this is what she's teaching, I'm aligned with that, this is something I haven't tried before, right? All of these lists of things, that's ultimately what your ideal client is looking to see. So think about frameworks, processes, breakdowns, thinking about strategies behind the scenes, thinking about client stories or case studies from your own life. Also thinking about bits and pieces of your own personal brand and how it translates to what you do today. If you've listened to my concept about subtle selling, this is the perfect place to implement that. And the reason is because people want to feel like they're connecting with your brand as a human first before they connect with a product or service directly. This is what gets people to ultimately still engage in sales pieces of content. This is what gets people not tired of you selling. This is also what gets people to engage in your brand fundamentally, regardless of what you're selling, when you're selling it, how you're selling it. Think about formats where you can do deep dives, explanations, tutorials, or I would like to call this like personalized nurturing. So again, this is the part where people would download a freebie, download a free training. Maybe they're going on your YouTube, maybe a private podcast, maybe it's a specific email series that you have set out for them. This is the part where ideally they are going out of your social media platform or marketing platform that you're utilizing to go explore your world somewhere else, whether that be through your website, another marketing channel, or again, some sort of downloadable resource. So when I'm thinking about the attraction-based content, the goal of that is to get somebody from audience member to follower. Maybe it's even getting somebody from cold follower to engaged follower. The next step when it comes to building based content, again, building that connection, that interest, and deepening their curiosity with you. The goal is to get them from engaged follower to kind of a starting community member. Maybe they're finally opting into your email list. Maybe they're finally downloading the things that you mentioned. Maybe they're finally engaging with pieces of content outside of that specific marketing platform, like your email list, your podcast, your YouTube channel. But again, this is where people confuse things the most, thinking that this type of content is supposed to get them immediately to the sale, but we're not quite there yet. This is the piece of content that gets them taking one step further. Building content, sometimes your personal story, sometimes your perspectives and your unique takes on your frameworks and things like that. Sometimes that will seem like attraction-based content, and sometimes that will get them to the conversion piece. But the goal here is to think about this is the part of funnel that gets people to take one step closer to the sale, not directly into the sale itself just yet. And finally, C obviously is conversion. This is where your goal is to get them to promptly take action into buying your product, your service, getting into your offer. So this is the bottom of the funnel. This is the purpose where you are sharing a lot more about your offer. This is where you are sharing the urgency, calls to actions, bonuses, perks, incentives. But notice how if you are only posting these types of things on your marketing channels right now, there are so many bigger parts of that funnel where people haven't necessarily gone back and forth with your brand to then even be interested in that part of the funnel just yet. You're over here posting about, again, your offer, the urgency, all of that, when people are like, wait, why do I even need this offer to begin with? Who are you? What is your story? Why did you even create this? What are your frameworks? And in result, they have to almost do so much more research and insight into qualifying themselves into the offer when your marketing channels around attraction and again, building could have done that for you. So personally, for me, this is where I like to take conversion a little bit more out of the social media platform that I'm on, through email, through a webinar, something that is a lot more direct. It could even be DMs, it could be a sales call, right? Things like that. And so here's how to get people going from the building phase into the conversion phase. Now, obviously, the goal isn't to never talk about your offer on your social media or not to have any sort of conversion pieces of content. But the conversion pieces of content are usually very niche, very specific, and very focused on the offer itself, that it doesn't necessarily perform in the same way that attraction or building based content does. And so remember how I mentioned in the building phase content, you should be focusing on producing things that get people out of the social media platform, downloading things, opting into things, getting into different funnels or sequences. Maybe they're signing up for a webinar. Maybe they're downloading your private podcast. Maybe they're finally joining your email list. Based on those outside resources, then your job is to be able to convert them. Then you can be a lot more specific about your offer, how you help them, things on sales page, your website, all of those things. And the reason why is because at that point, your ideal client has shown you that they're interested enough and are prepared to listen to more about your specific offering. They know their problems. They resonate with you already, align with your values and how you teach things and how you are willing to kind of help them solve their problem. They already know that your brand is unique, are wanting to move further into that process. So at that point, the conversion process, you can afford to focus a lot more on direct selling, your offer, your CTAs, again, all of the little nitty-gritty details. Whereas before, like I mentioned, if you are only focusing on that type of content, there are so many missing pieces for them that they either have to explore it themselves or they're just going to wait for you to present it to them. There are occasions where you can share the details of your offer on stories or through like a carousel or things like that. But I would say it's very, very sparingly to be done on the social media platform of your choice. And ideally, you should be working on that building phase to get people out and into kind of the conversion-based area that you're looking for. So for example, we have a private podcast where people can opt in and then they'll go through a sequence to prepare them for our rebrand experience offer. We have something else that we're working on, which is going to be a training where people can go into a sequence and then go into kind of our sales studio offer. And this again doesn't have to be through emails. There are so many automations that you can do through DM selling or through sales calls processes or things like that. But again, the main thing is getting people out of there, because most of the time when people are on social media, they're not going on social media with the intention of, I'm going to buy something today, like they are with email or maybe someone's website or things like that. Most of the time, they're going onto social media wanting that building building piece. They're wanting to build relationships, building connection, building desire, building curiosity, maybe even building like education and value for themselves. And most of the time, people are wanting to experiment and test drive something before they decide to pay you fully for an offer. So notice how overall, like not every platform or not even every feature of a platform or every single content piece needs to focus on that conversion piece, right? Ultimately, they all lead to conversion. Ultimately, they will all follow your social media kind of funnel, but you need to start off with the attraction and the building pieces first, and then people will take themselves into the conversion piece once you've optimized enough things for them, once they've expressed enough interest. And this is where also your job is to focus on, okay, how can I be building connections faster? How can I make sure I'm attracting people consistently? How can I make sure the kind of connections that I'm doing in that building phase are actually qualified leads so that when they get to the conversion piece, I'm increasing my conversion numbers? So again, not every piece of the funnel needs to do every job. Not every piece of content needs to do every job, but they all funnel into that last component. And this is why if you are finally putting out your rebrand, if you are someone who is like putting out things for your campaign, again, it's really important that you kind of set the tone with your audience and already start training your audience in terms of how to behave with you when it comes to your content, thinking about content that is going to focus on the attract and the build, and then leading them somewhere that they can focus a lot more on the conversion. And that way you can get better data and insights to continue refining your campaigns and your personal brand.